Imagine this. You're at home. San Diego, California. Your 4-year-old daughter quietly walks up to you. There is something strange about her expression, a seriousness that doesn't belong on a child's face. Her eyes don't look like a child's eyes. And then she says, "Mum, is this really my home? My real home is in Mesa, Arizona, and my husband used to call me Laura." At first, you smile. Children say strange things. Their imaginations are powerful, right? But then, your daughter keeps talking. She gives her husband's full name, Daniel Mitchell. She describes the exact address of a house she once lived in. She explains the inside of the house, the color of the walls, the bedroom window facing the street. Then her voice drops, almost like a whisper. "I died during childbirth." Something inside you freezes, because this is no longer a game. This is far beyond a child's imagination. And that's when the questions begin. How can a child describe a city she has never been to with such precise detail? How can she know the secrets of a man she has never met? And most disturbing of all, is it possible for the living to remember death? This story is not a myth, not an urban legend. This case occurred in the United States in 1998, and what followed was so unsettling that it led to federal investigations, scientific examinations, and dozens of details that remain unexplained to this day. Today, I'm going to tell you one of the most documented and most debated reincarnation cases in modern history. A story that begins with the words of a child, but shakes the adult world to its core. Because what you're about to hear may force you to question everything you think you know about life and death. And perhaps whether death is truly the end. Emily Carter was born in 1994 in San Diego, California. She grew up in a quiet neighborhood, in an ordinary house, as part of an ordinary family. When her mother, Sarah Carter, later spoke about Emily's early years, she always said the same thing. Emily was no different from other children. She played, she laughed, she was afraid, she cried, until the age of 4. The first thing anyone noticed was a sudden change in her behavior. One morning, Emily woke up and asked her mother a simple question. "Mum, why do we live here?" Sarah didn't think much of it. She assumed it was just another random question. Children ask strange things sometimes, but Emily continued, "I don't belong here." That sentence unsettled Sarah, because Emily didn't say it like a game or a passing thought. She said it with complete seriousness. From that day on, Emily began talking in her sleep, at night. But these were not random words. The same phrases, the same names, the same places, and every time it ended with the same sentence. "My name is not Emily." At first, Sarah convinced herself this was just imagination, until one day, as Emily sat quietly in the kitchen, she suddenly said, "My name is Laura Mitchell." The name meant nothing to the family. No relatives, no friends, no familiar reference from television. But Emily didn't stop there. "My husband's name is Daniel Mitchell. We lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Our house was on Old Market Street." Sarah froze. And what made it even more disturbing was the way Emily spoke. She wasn't trying to remember. She was simply telling, naturally, calmly, Without hesitation, Emily began describing the house. A courtyard in the center, a well on the right side, the kitchen downstairs, dark rooms, the bedroom upstairs, with a window facing the street. At that point, Sarah knew this could no longer be coincidence, but what frightened her the most was the emotional tone in Emily's voice. Every time she finished speaking, Emily would stop. Her eyes would fill with tears, and she would say, "I suffered a lot during childbirth. Then everything went dark." Could a 4-year-old child talk about dying in childbirth? Sarah stopped sleeping at night. She tried to explain it to her husband, but at first he refused to believe it. "Children make up stories," he said. "It will pass." But it didn't. Every day, Emily added new details, and those details became increasingly specific. Eventually, Sarah realized something terrifying. Emily could not have learned these things. The family had never been to Santa Fe. They didn't know anyone named Laura Mitchell. They had never even heard the name Daniel Mitchell. And yet Emily spoke as if she had lived there. And this was the moment when the story stopped being a simple child's tale. Because very soon, Emily's words would collide with the real world for the very first time, and that collision would change everything beyond repair. What Emily Carter described did not fade with time. On the contrary, it became clearer with each passing day. Too structured for the memory of a 4-year-old, too consistent, and most importantly, far too detailed. Emily was no longer talking only about names and cities. She began describing everyday life, habits, small, deeply personal details. One evening, while her mother, Sarah Carter, was cooking in the kitchen, Emily called out from behind her, "Mom, Laura liked the yellow dress. She always wore it on holidays." Sarah turned around. "Who is Laura?" she asked. Emily answered without hesitation. "Me. Before." That night, Sarah admitted, for the first time, that she was afraid, because Emily wasn't telling a fairy tale. She was describing a memory. Another day, Emily pointed to the left side of her chest. "There was a mark here, Laura's birthmark." Sarah knelt down and took her daughter's hand. On Emily's body, in the exact same place, there was a small, light-colored mark. Was it a coincidence? Emily continued. "Daniel was afraid of needles. So was I. I don't like pain." Those words echoed in Sarah's mind, because Emily had never had an injection before, and yet, every time vaccination day came, she panicked. And then, the most disturbing detail emerged. One morning, Emily suddenly said, "I hid money under the bedroom floor. No one knew." Sarah didn't know what to say. She asked how much money. Emily answered instantly. $2,000. Under the wooden board. At that moment, Sarah understood this was no longer a child's game. Still, she wanted to be sure. The family didn't talk about it among themselves. They didn't tell the neighbors. None of Emily's statements were verified. Until a completely random moment. One afternoon, a man was going door to door in the neighborhood, selling fabric. When Sarah opened the door, Emily ran to her side. She stopped when she saw the man, narrowed her eyes, and then asked loudly, "Do you know Daniel Mitchell? He sells fabric, too." The man froze. "I do," he said. But how do you know that? In that moment, the air inside the house changed. The man began to explain. Daniel Mitchell did, in fact, run a small shop in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and his wife, Laura Mitchell, had died years earlier during childbirth. Sarah's knees began to shake, because Emily could not have heard this information anywhere. The family had never been to Santa Fe. They didn't know Daniel Mitchell. They had never heard the name Laura Mitchell. And yet Emily spoke, as if she had lived through it all. And at that moment, for Sarah and her family, only one option remained: to take these claims seriously. Because this story was no longer something that could be ignored, and very soon the door to the truth would be opened, deliberately, for the very first time. Emily's words were no longer confined to the walls of the house. What she was saying had now made contact with the real world. After the fabric salesman from the neighborhood left, Sarah Carter collapsed onto a kitchen chair. Her hands rested on her knees. Her breathing was rapid, because that man had confirmed everything Emily had said. There was a man named Daniel Mitchell. He lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and his wife, Laura Mitchell, had died years earlier during childbirth. From that moment on, denial was no longer possible. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Sarah and her husband talked for a long time. She must have heard it somewhere, her husband said. It could be a coincidence. But Sarah remained silent, because Emily's statements were not limited to one or two details. The next day, Sarah spoke to her daughter in a calm voice. "Emily, what else do you remember about Laura?" Emily answered without stopping her play, without hesitation. Daniel's shop was on the corner of Old Market Street. There was a red awning in front of it. Inside, a large wooden counter, and a small room in the back. Sarah wrote everything down, every word. Emily continued. There was a scar on Daniel's right knee. He fell when he was a child. I was very scared that day. That detail was far too personal. At that point, Sarah made a decision. Before contacting a stranger in Santa Fe, she wanted a written record. She wrote a letter. Polite, distant, clear. In the letter, she explained that her 4-year-old daughter claimed to be Laura Mitchell, that she spoke of a man named Daniel Mitchell, and that all of this information was completely unknown to their family. She sent the letter to Santa Fe, and they waited. Days passed. During that time, Emily continued to speak. One morning, she suddenly said, "Daniel took the money. He needed it for the funeral expenses." When Sarah heard those words, her chest tightened, because this detail had never been asked of Emily before. And then, the letter arrived. The envelope was opened with trembling hands. It was from Daniel Mitchell. He answered each point, one by one. Yes, Laura had a birthmark on the left side of her chest. Yes, she wore a yellow dress on holidays. And yes, she had hidden money under the bedroom floor. At the end of the letter, there was a single sentence. No one knew where that money was hidden except Laura. I never shared that information with anyone. Sarah placed the letter on the table. Tears streamed down her face. This was no longer a possibility, not a coincidence. This was something that exceeded the limits of logic. In the final lines of the letter, Daniel Mitchell wrote one more thing. "If you allow it, I would like to meet your daughter." When Sarah read those words, something inside her broke. Because this meeting was now an irreversible threshold. If Emily was telling the truth, this encounter would change everything. If she was not, the story would end there. But deep down, Sarah already knew. This story was only just beginning. November 1998. Daniel Mitchell traveled from Santa Fe, New Mexico, to San Diego, California. He was not alone. He brought someone with him. His son, Ethan Mitchell. Ethan was 10 years old at the time. This journey was not driven by curiosity alone. It was a confrontation. Ever since losing his wife, Laura Mitchell, during childbirth, the questions inside Daniel's mind had never stopped. Could I have done something differently? What if I had taken her to the hospital earlier? What if I had insisted more? That sense of guilt had followed him for years. And now, waiting for him in San Diego, was a 4-year-old girl. When Daniel stepped into the Carter family's house, time seemed to slow down. Emily Carter was playing in the living room. The moment she saw Daniel, the toy slipped from her hand. She froze. Then she ran. With tears streaming down her face, she wrapped her arms around Daniel and said, in front of everyone, "You came to see me too late. Why did you remarry? And where is my son?" A deep silence filled the room. That information had never appeared in any letter. No one had told Emily that Daniel had remarried. Daniel's face turned pale. His knees weakened. Emily looked at the child standing beside Daniel. "Ethan, you've grown so much. When I left, you were just a baby." Ethan was stunned. There was something strange in the way this little girl looked at him. She didn't feel like a stranger. It was as if she had known him for a very long time. Daniel tried to steady himself, but his thoughts were in chaos. This meeting was no longer an ordinary visit. Daniel decided to test her. In a calm voice, he asked, "Then, where were our personal belongings in the house?" Emily didn't hesitate. "My clothes were in the wooden chest. Your clothes were in the closet on the left. My gold earrings were in the small box under the bed." Cold sweat formed on Daniel's forehead. Everything was correct. But the real blow came a few seconds later. Emily lifted her head, looked Daniel straight in the eyes, and spoke slowly. "Do you remember what we talked about that night? I told you that if something happened to me during childbirth, you had to take good care of Ethan." Daniel collapsed where he stood. That conversation had happened between only 2 people. That night, in the bedroom, with no one else present, in the final hours before Laura Mitchell died. The only person in the world who knew those words was Daniel himself. And the 4-year-old girl standing before him remembered them. At that moment, Daniel had no doubt left, but accepting the truth was far more difficult than understanding it, because what came next would either confirm everything or destroy it completely. The final test. Daniel decided to take Emily to Santa Fe, to the place Laura had lived, to her home, without telling her anything. From the moment the letter arrived, the Carter family's house was no longer the same. Sarah Carter read Daniel Mitchell's words over and over again. Every line matched exactly what Emily had said. But there was one sentence that tightened Sarah's throat. No one knew where that money was hidden, except Laura. Not even I ever shared that information. That sentence took everything to another level. Because a child might guess a name, she might have heard a city mentioned. She might have picked up a detail by chance, but revealing a secret no one else knew, the exact location of money hidden inside the house, and even the amount. This went far beyond the limits of coincidence. That night, Sarah sat beside Emily. She softened her voice. "Emily, what else do you know about Laura?" Emily didn't look away. She spoke not like a child, but like an adult. "I suffered a lot during childbirth. Then I couldn't breathe. Daniel was crying. They took Ethan into his arms." Sarah flinched. Ethan. Daniel's son. No one had ever told Emily his name. Sarah went deeper. "What was Daniel like?" Emily answered without hesitation. "He raises his eyebrow when he talks. His hands always smell like fabric. When he came home, he always looked at the courtyard first." This wasn't the kind of story a child imagines. It sounded like something lived. Sarah was no longer alone. Her husband had read the letter too, and he was asking the same question. How could she possibly know these things? No one had spoken about it at home. There was no such story on television. No research had been done online. And on top of that, Daniel Mitchell had clearly written in his letter that he had never shared these details with anyone. The Carter family was certain of one thing. There was a truth at the heart of this. But what kind of truth? A misunderstanding? A conscious deception? Or something far harder to explain? Sarah made one final move. She wrote back to Daniel. Short, clear, controlled. "If you truly wish to come," she wrote, "you may meet our daughter, but everything will be under our supervision." After sending the reply, days of waiting followed. Emily, however, didn't wait. She kept talking, as if something was pushing her, as if she had to speak. One day she suddenly said, "Daniel thought he had left me behind, but I didn't leave. I didn't want Ethan to be alone." Sarah shivered when she heard those words, because now Emily was no longer describing details. She was describing a purpose. Then the Carter family saw a second envelope in the mailbox. Daniel Mitchell was coming. The date was set. In November 1998, Daniel Mitchell would arrive in San Diego with his son. That day, Sarah understood something clearly. This meeting would either end the story or begin it in a way that could never be undone. And the most frightening possibility was this. If Emily was telling the truth, the man who would walk through their door was not a stranger, but someone from the life Emily claimed to remember. November 1st, 1998. Daniel Mitchell arrived in San Diego, California, from Santa Fe, New Mexico. He was not alone. With him was his son, Ethan Mitchell. For Daniel, this journey was not curiosity. It was a confrontation he had been avoiding for years. Ever since his wife, Laura Mitchell, had died during childbirth, there had been a voice inside him that never went silent. If only I had realized sooner. If I had done something differently. Could I have saved her? There were no answers to these questions, but the guilt remained. When they entered the Carter family's home, time seemed to slow. Emily Carter was in the living room, playing with her toys. She heard the door open, looked up. The moment she saw Daniel, the toy slipped from her hand. She froze for a second. Then she ran. She wrapped her arms around Daniel's legs, tears streaming down her face, and spoke loudly. "You came to see me too late. Why did you remarry? And where is my son?" Everyone in the room froze. That information had never appeared in any letter, had never been mentioned in any conversation. No one had told Emily that Daniel had remarried. Daniel's face drained of color, his knees weakened. Emily turned to the child standing beside Daniel. She studied him carefully. "Ethan, you've grown so much. When I left, you were still a baby." Ethan didn't know what to say. There was something unsettling in the way this little girl looked at him. It was not the gaze of a stranger, not the gaze of a child. It was as if she knew him. Daniel took a deep breath. His mind was in chaos, but he was still searching for one last explanation. He steadied himself and asked Emily, "Then, where were our personal belongings in the house?" Emily didn't hesitate. "My clothes were in the wooden chest in the room. Your clothes were in the closet on the left. My gold earrings were in the small box under the bed." Cold sweat ran down Daniel's forehead. Every detail was correct. But the real blow came seconds later. Emily lifted her head, looked directly into Daniel's eyes. Her voice slowed. "Do you remember what we talked about that night? I told you that if anything happened to me during childbirth, you had to take good care of Ethan." Daniel collapsed where he stood. That conversation had taken place between only two people. That night, in the bedroom, with no one else present, just before Laura Mitchell's death. The only person in the world who knew those words was Daniel, and the 4-year-old girl standing before him remembered that moment. Daniel had no doubts left, but accepting it was harder than understanding it. Because if this was true, it wasn't just an anomaly. It meant that the line between life and death was not as clear as we believed. And in that moment, Daniel made a decision. One final test would be done. The hardest one. Emily would be taken to Santa Fe, to the place Laura had lived, to her home, and no one would tell Emily anything about the journey. December 13th, 1998. No one told Emily where they were going. Not her mother, Sarah, not Daniel, not anyone traveling with them. But Emily knew. Shortly after the train began to move, she looked out the window and started speaking. "We'll pass through Mesa soon. Then we'll turn north. We'll stop near Albuquerque." The train car fell silent. The adults exchanged looks. No one spoke. Emily continued. "When we arrive in Santa Fe, there will be a clock tower on the right side of the station." That detail sent a chill through Daniel. Emily had never been to Santa Fe before. No one had discussed the route. No map had been shown. And yet what she described matched reality exactly. When the train pulled into the station, Emily was the first to stand up. As soon as the doors opened, she stepped onto the platform. She looked around. then pointed. "Look, the clock tower is still here." Daniel held his breath. But the real test was about to begin. After leaving the station, Daniel deliberately gave no direction. He didn't ask for directions. He didn't call a taxi. He simply looked at Emily. "Can you show us the house?" Emily nodded. "Of course." And she started walking through the streets as if she had lived there for years. She turned at the correct corners, stopped in front of certain shops, looked closely at others. This used to be a grocery store. That shop opened later. Daniel's heart was racing. At one corner, Emily saw an elderly woman. She stopped. "Aunt Margaret," she called out, "do you still live in the blue house?" The woman froze. "How do you know me?" she asked. This woman was Margaret Lewis, and she did, in fact, live in a blue house. Emily continued. "Did your daughter Olivia get married? She was engaged when I left." Tears filled the woman's eyes. "She got married 2 years ago," she said. Daniel could no longer speak. This was no longer a possibility. This was a repeated, confirmed reality. Then Emily suddenly stopped. In front of them stood an ordinary house. Emily looked at the door. "This is it," she said. "My home." This was the house Laura Mitchell had lived in with Daniel. Emily knocked on the door. The door opened, and in that moment, the past and the present stood on the same threshold for the very first time. When the door opened, no one spoke, not even for a second. An elderly woman appeared from inside the house. The moment she saw Emily, she froze in place. Her eyes widened. Her hands were trembling. "You," she whispered. "You look so much like my daughter did when she was little." This woman was Laura Mitchell's mother. Emily stepped forward. Without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around her. "Mom, I missed you so much." Time seemed to stop inside the house. The elderly woman's knees gave way, and she sat down in a chair. Tears streamed down her face. "Laura, is it really you?" Emily lifted her head. "I'm here," she said. "But now I have a small body." No one could respond to that sentence. Emily began walking through the house. No one guided her. She stepped into the courtyard. "The well is still here," she said. "I used to sit beside it." She went down to the kitchen. "The stove has been moved," she said, "but the window is the same." She climbed the stairs, walked straight into the bedroom. "This is it," she said. "Our room." Daniel's breath caught in his chest. Emily looked at the place where the bed had been. Then she walked to the window. "It faces the street," she said. "I used to watch outside at night." Everything was exactly right. But it wasn't over. Emily looked down at the floor, stopped at a specific spot. She bent down, lifted one of the wooden boards. "I hid the money here," she said. "Did anyone take it?" Daniel slowly nodded. "I had to take it after the funeral." Emily replied with a sad smile. "That's okay. I saved it for that." That sentence shattered the last resistance inside Daniel. This house was a place Emily should never have come to, and yet she moved through it as if she had never left. About an hour later, Emily stopped. She took a deep breath. "Now let's go to the cemetery," she said. I want to see where my body was placed." No one objected, because no one believed anymore that there was anything Emily didn't know. Daniel thought to himself, if Emily finds that place too, this story will no longer be just a mystery. It will be the quietest, yet strongest, proof that death is not truly the end. And together, they left the house. They drove toward the outskirts of Santa Fe. The car was silent. No one spoke. Not Daniel, not Sarah, not Emily in the back seat. It was as if everyone was thinking the same thing, but no one dared to say it out loud. If this is true, there is no turning back. When they reached the entrance to the cemetery, Emily looked out the window. She paused, then spoke softly. "Here." Daniel slammed on the brakes. No one had told Emily where the cemetery was. The word cemetery had never even been spoken during the trip. And yet, Emily knew exactly where they were. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. Emily stepped out of the car. She didn't look around. She didn't read any signs. She walked forward, straight ahead, through hundreds of graves, without hesitation. At one point, she slowed down, walked as if counting her steps. Then she stopped. In front of her was a simple grave, with no name on it. Emily dropped to her knees. "You left me here," she said. "You placed me here." Daniel's knees trembled. He covered his face with his hands. This was Laura Mitchell's grave. Emily touched the soil, slowly ran her fingers across it. Tears began to fall. But this was not the crying of a child. This was the crying of someone who remembered. "Childbirth hurt so much," she whispered. "I was scared when I couldn't breathe. Then I saw you. You were crying." Sarah closed her eyes. She couldn't bear the scene any longer. Emily placed her hand on the grave. "Thank you," she said, "for taking care of my body, for treating it with respect." The adults around her began to cry. No one had expected those words. A 4-year-old child remembering the care shown to her body after death. This was no longer something that could be explained. For a moment, there was silence. The wind moved between the gravestones. A bird called in the distance. Then Emily stood up. She wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and said the unexpected. "Now I understand why I came back." Daniel looked up. Emily looked at him. There was something unfinished. Everyone held their breath, because that sentence made one thing clear. This story was not over yet. Emily continued. "I needed to say it here." And then, words that would change Daniel's life forever were waiting to be spoken. But those words would not be spoken at the cemetery. Not that day, because the true confrontation was about to begin with the next step. As they returned from the cemetery, the sky was beginning to darken. The streets of Santa Fe were quiet. No one spoke, but everyone carried the same weight. Daniel Mitchell sat behind the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road, lost in thought. Emily sat in the back seat. She was silent, but there was a sense of relief on her face, as if a burden she had carried for a long time had been left behind at the cemetery. When they arrived home, Emily sat down on the chair by the entrance. Her feet dangled above the floor. Daniel stood across from her. This time he didn't want to test her. He didn't want to ask questions anymore. But Emily spoke. "Daniel," she said, "you're still blaming yourself." That sentence revealed a truth no one had ever said out loud. Daniel lifted his head, his eyes filled with tears. "I thought I didn't do enough," he said. "I could have noticed earlier. I could have saved you." Emily shook her head. "No," she said calmly. "You did everything you could." The air in the room grew heavy. Emily continued. "When I left, I didn't want you to think that way. I told you that night." Daniel's lips trembled. "But he said, "I left you behind." Emily stood up. She stood in front of Daniel. She was the height of a child, but her voice was not a child's voice. "You didn't leave me," she said. "The road just ended here." Those words undid the knot Daniel had carried inside him for years. His tears became uncontrollable. Ethan watched quietly. He was crying too, but he didn't know why. He only felt that something had been set right. Emily turned to Ethan. "You don't need to be afraid anymore," she said. "I'm here." Ethan nodded. That night, for the first time, Emily did not speak in her sleep. No names, no cities, no words from the past. The house was silent, and for the first time, that silence felt peaceful. But the story did not end there. Because what had happened was no longer just a family matter. Daniel Mitchell knew this had gone beyond personal boundaries. What they had experienced needed to be examined, questioned, documented. And very soon, this story would spread beyond Santa Fe. It would draw the attention of scientists, journalists, and eventually federal institutions, because there was now a case too consistent, too thoroughly verified, to be ignored. And what lay ahead was the most difficult process of all, the one that would make everything official. What happened began as a whisper in Santa Fe. Then it spread to San Diego, and soon it moved far beyond local boundaries. Journalists began calling, academics requested files, and eventually the case caught the attention of a federal review board. This was not an ordinary inquiry, because what existed was not just the claim of a child. There were verified addresses, private personal details that had never been public witness testimonies, and multiple independent confirmations. For this reason, the case was officially opened in 1999. An independent federal investigation panel was formed to conduct the inquiry. The panel included legal experts, psychologists, journalists, and researchers with strong academic backgrounds. Their objective was clear. If there was a hoax, expose it. If not, place the truth on record. Their first decision was strict. Emily Carter would be questioned separately from her family. No guidance, no suggestions, no preparation. Interviews lasting several hours began. Emily was asked questions about Laura Mitchell's life that had never appeared in public records. What did she wear at her wedding? How many steps were at the entrance of the house? Where exactly was the scar on Daniel Mitchell's knee? Emily did not hesitate. She named colors. She gave numbers. She described locations. The panel members took notes, a lot of notes, but it wasn't enough. Investigators traveled to Santa Fe. They spoke with neighbors, former shop owners, relatives. Every statement was compared. The result was far more unsettling than they had expected. Of the 25 specific details examined, 23 were confirmed as accurate. The remaining 2 could not be verified, because there were no living witnesses left. But what affected the panel most was not the details that were confirmed. It was the details Emily knew that no one else remembered. During one interview, Emily said, "I lost a tooth while I was pregnant." Daniel Mitchell did not remember this, but Laura Mitchell's mother confirmed it. "Yes," she said. "In her 6th month, one of her teeth fell out." Daniel had not been home that day. This information was unknown even to Laura's husband. The panel then conducted photographic tests. Old photographs of different women were shown to Emily. Without hesitation, she pointed to one. "This is me," she said. "Laura." At that point, there was no turning back for the panel. They could not close the case. Because every new test did not weaken the story, it strengthened it. And the entire file was reduced to a single question. If this was not a game, if this was not an illusion, then what was it? After the official investigation was completed, the file was not closed. On the contrary, it entered a deeper phase. Emily Carter was no longer seen as just an unusual child. She had become a witness between 2 lives. When the panel's report was made public, it caused a nationwide reaction. Newspapers ran headlines. Television programs debated it. Academic circles were divided. But for Emily, life went on. She was still a child. She went to school. She had friends. And then, something unusual began to happen. The memories belonging to Laura Mitchell slowly started to fade. Emily was the first to notice. One day, she said to her mother, "Sarah, some things are becoming harder to remember now." Images that had once been clear began to blur. Names, voices, faces, as if her mind was trying to balance between 2 lives. Researchers followed this process closely. In particular, Dr. Andrew Collins monitored the case for years. In an evaluation published in December 2012, he stated, "Emily's accounts are consistent, yet they diminish naturally over time. This resembles a remembered experience rather than a guided narrative." Some of Emily's behaviors also drew attention. She carried Laura Mitchell's fears. She disliked needles. She avoided spicy food. And on her body, there was a small mark on the left side of her chest, exactly where Laura Mitchell's birthmark had been. As Emily grew older, her facial features began to change. Researchers compared old photographs. Images of Laura Mitchell at the same age were placed side by side with images of Emily. The resemblance was unsettling. But the most striking development came when Mark Reynolds entered the case. An American investigative journalist, Reynolds spent months trying to prove that the case was a hoax. He spoke with witnesses, reviewed documents, searched for weak points. The result? He found none. In his report, he wrote, "I tried every possible way to disprove this case, but each attempt only strengthened the internal consistency of the account." By this time, Emily had turned 12, and one day, without anyone asking, she said, "I don't need to remember anymore." Her mother asked what she meant. Emily replied, "I've done what I needed to do." That sentence echoed in the minds of everyone involved in the investigation, because from the very beginning, Emily had always said the same thing. There was a reason I came back, and that reason had now been fulfilled. But the story still did not end there, because Emily began for the first time to describe what happens after death, and what she said next would be more unsettling than anything heard before. After the age of 12, Emily Carter rarely spoke about her past. Laura Mitchell, Daniel, Santa Fe. Those names slowly faded from her mind, but they never disappeared completely. From time to time, she would wake up at night and stand by the window, looking outside. No one ever knew what she was looking at. One day, she said to her mother, "Sarah, not remembering doesn't mean forgetting." For researchers, this period became the most critical phase of the case, because Emily's memories did not grow like a story. They diminished naturally. This almost entirely ruled out the possibility of suggestion or manipulation. Emily grew up. She became a teacher. She chose to work with children. She never married. When people asked her why, she always gave the same answer. "My heart has already lived one life. I don't want to be unfair to another." In 2019, when Emily was 65 years old, her health suddenly declined. During her final days in the hospital, she mentioned a name she had not spoken in years. "Daniel is at peace now," she said. "I don't need to wait for him anymore." Those words were spoken weeks before the news of Daniel Mitchell's death. Emily's final wish was simple: to be taken to Santa Fe, to be laid to rest beside Laura Mitchell's grave. At Daniel Mitchell's request, Emily was buried in the same cemetery. "They were traveling the same road," said Daniel's son, Ethan, "in different bodies, but within the same story." Today, that grave is visited by thousands of people every year. They don't go there searching for proof. They don't go looking for answers. They go there looking for hope. Emily Carter's story does not offer scientific certainty, but it leaves behind a powerful question. If consciousness can exist independently of the body, is death truly the end? Maybe not. Maybe life is not a single line. Maybe we don't learn just once, but many times. And perhaps most importantly, love is independent of time and of the body. Emily's story whispers this to us. Death is not a closure. It is only a passage. And perhaps, one day, we will all awaken again on a path we have walked before.